right, Jenny. Hey, congratulations for your feature film, Acid Test.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
More importantly, it's being showcased at the Austin Film Festival this year. Tell us, tell us how you feel about that.
Well, it's really big. I mean, especially coming off of COVID, where festivals were going hybrid, and the fact that this year was still really kind of uncertain for many film festivals. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. But to have an in-person screening at a big film festival, well-known, well-respected, in Texas, and we're a Texas-based cast and crew, it just means the world to me. The words really don't properly describe it, and we just had our premiere yesterday, and I probably need time to process everything. It's a lot. So, but wonderful. It's just so wonderful.
Well, then let's start off with the easy question. Where did the original idea came from for Acid Test? Because it says it's based off a true story or memories. Was it your memories?
Yes, it is based off of my story. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and, had in the 90s, Riot Grrrl was hitting the scene. Bikini Kill, which is kind of a forefront of the Riot Grrrl movement, was based in DC at the time. So I really got to be a part of and see that movement begin. And it really inspired me as a teenager with, a family dynamic where, the father was very much in charge. He and I were very similar in personality, so we butted heads a lot. He and I also got along really well and, had a lot of fun together. And my mother's an immigrant. She's originally from Eastern Europe. And so I don't know, there was just a lot of stuff over the years where there were these kind of key moments in my life that I thought would make an interesting story. They say, write what you know. And I had been producing some other people's work in Houston, and I really wanted to get back to writing and directing my own stuff. And I knew from, seeing friends do it, that writing a short film and then kind of turning that into a feature was a great way to kind of get to that feature, which, for most filmmakers, doing a feature is like a gold ring. It's that kind of standard of, well, now I'm a filmmaker because I made a feature film. So I had this moment in my life where I had dropped acid at a concert, and I had gone home to my parents and told them that I was tripping, and they kind of freaked out. And there was this kind of family drama while I was still hallucinating that I thought made a really interesting story. So I started off with a short film, and that's where we found our lead actress, Juliana DeStefano, and Mia Ruiz, who plays the mother. And I tend to cast open. I've always done that. I like collaborating with my actors. So even when I'm writing something that I have a specific idea of who it is or where they're from, or, I do all the character backgrounds, I still am open to talking about how that might look or change depending on which actor I feel the strongest about taking the role. And so for me, maintaining that kind of immigrant storyline was the most important thing. And so then once we cast Mia, it became a question of, well, how do we somehow make sure that it remains true to my story? Because I don't want to appropriate this story. I don't want to appropriate somebody else's experiences, but that it also kind of translates or bridges and becomes authentic as well for these other people's experiences, in my cast, and so that it'll ring true to somebody, who's Mexican American, or, hopefully it translates to a lot of people, but yeah, so that kind of became the process where I wanted to stick with that, write for these actors that I already had, and still kind of that same process of taking moments from my own life, but then talking with them and kind of making it this hybrid story that we felt we could all own in some way, which I think is such an exciting part of filmmaking, is where everybody has ownership or feels ownership to the story, whether they're the grip or the DP or the, you know, the actor. I think that ownership and feeling like they're contributing and collaborating, as opposed to just servicing, you know, as a technician or something. So that was really exciting to me, and how everything kind of started.
Oh, most excellent. That explains why you know, your character is half Mexican, because you changed it in the case of the cast, because you want the
Exactly.
most perfect cast portraying your characters. Wow. Now, let's go back to the Riot Grrrl, because Riot Grrrl was a movement back in the early 90s. I actually remember this is because it's kind of funny, is because 93 was 92, 93 was a year when I actually was a freshman in college itself. So I totally remember all the politics. I remember there was the Riot Grrrl movement. Now, of course, Riot Grrrl movement is still going on today, but tell us about recreating that Riot Grrrl movement for yourself for the film, because obviously, you know, you can't find the original band members, you know, from 30 years ago for a film like this.
Right, exactly. So I was very clear in my own mind that I didn't want it to just be a nostalgia film where we were recreating exactly how it felt like to be in the 90s. I didn't really want to transport people back in time in the same way that, you know, movies or television shows do so successfully, because I wanted it to feel current, because the issues and the themes, the politics, the feminism, all of those things are still happening today. There are still activist, you know, fights and protests, and certainly we've seen in these last couple of years just a lot of kind of turbulence in what's going on in the political scene. And we had a lot of younger crew members on our set who, during the monologue and kind of as we were putting things together, but the history teacher has this monologue about the current events, and the film opens with this idea of what's going on in the current events, and we see a clip of Anita Hill and the Rodney King situation, and you know, the first Persian Gulf War, and coming off the Cold War. And I had a lot of younger people who were on our set, and we had just come off of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, and they just couldn't quite believe that there had already been a woman who had to testify in the Senate against a Supreme Court justice nominee. They were just like, wait, this happened already to somebody else? And we were all like, yep, that and that kind of, I think for many people, as you get older, there's a certain amount of despair that you feel like, oh God, we're still fighting the same fights. Why can't it just get better? Why can't it, you know, why are we still here? But there obviously has been a lot of progress made. And sometimes there's the 2 steps forward, 3 steps back kind of thing. And I think it's just part of being human. And the Riot Grrrl music was what I guess I responded to it was that it was kind of this visceral battle cry, you know, which wasn't necessarily, it didn't necessarily have a you know, rules or a thought process. I mean, there was the manifesto certainly, but it wasn't it wasn't like, okay, this is what we're going to do to change the world. You know, there wasn't an agenda. It was just this screaming into the void because, you know, women had come before them. There were the suffragettes. There was the second wave, you know, feminist movement, you know, women getting out into the workplace. And again, we were still here. There was still, you know, this feeling of, why are we still fighting some of these same fights, and why can't we have ownership of who we are and our choices? And I just really responded to it, and I certainly felt it for myself. And I think you're seeing again a lot of those same things play out. And it's certainly changed. There are kind of different elements of the conversation now than there were back when I was a teenager, but there's still kind of that same core. And like you said, Riot Grrrl hasn't really gone away, but it's kind of changed. Like all music, there's a connection to it. And I really wanted to tap into what that looked like today, because one of the criticisms of Riot Grrrl back in the 90s was that it was very exclusionary. You know, it wasn't inclusive to non-white or, you know, LGBTQ members. And that was something that really did not sit well with me over the years. And I didn't want to represent something that I didn't agree with in that sense, you know, just because it would be historically accurate. Because even though that maybe was the face of Riot Grrrl at the time, the people in the audience were still mixed. You know, they were still from all different kinds of backgrounds. And so we had found originally for the short film a Houston band named Giant Kitty that was working kind of in this sphere and hit those kind of diversity markers, for lack of a better word, that I was hoping to present. And then Miriam, the lead singer, helped find the other bands that were in the feature film, all Texas-based. We have Pleasure Venom out in Austin, Fea from San Antonio, Imposter Boys again here in Houston, and a couple of other artists. And they were, you know, BIPOC, you know, many of them members of the LGBTQ community, but they were, you know, creating music that was politically active. I guess that's the best way to look at it, is that isn't, maybe Riot Grrrl is not necessarily the right term for it today, but it's politically active, screaming into the void kind of music, this kind of visceral emotional response to injustices that sometimes you just, you know, there isn't necessarily an agenda for how to fix it. You just need an outlet, some kind of emotional outlet. And I really wanted to tap into what that looked like today. And again, not have the movie be a throwback, but to appeal to young people today who are also incredibly politically active, who are really, you know, trying to be a voice. And because they're young, nobody's listening to them. And so I think that, you know, I wanted it to feel normal, because as a teenager in the 90s, that was our normal. We didn't know what HD or 4K was, or, you know, these kind of we didn't have cell phones. So I wanted it to be set in the 90s, but for it to really reflect modern times.
Now, it seems like politics was in your blood back then.
Well, I am from DC, so yeah. You know, it's funny because my dad came to DC and worked as a lobbyist, and I ended up going to a private high school where, you know, the president's kids and senators' kids and, you know, all these political kids went to. And it was one of those things where, to a certain extent, I hate politics. But on the other hand, I absolutely think it's your civic duty to engage, because that's, you kind of, there isn't really another system. You have to find a way to work the system, and it's frustrating and it's slow and it's but I just feel very strongly about that. So you definitely see the kind of political satire, I hope, in the movie, where it's to a certain extent, it's not about, oh, you have to be a Democrat versus Republican, because I think we try to show that the labels in a way don't really matter. It's the engagement, it's the belief in what you're fighting for, it's equality for all, you know, it's these kind of basic human rights.
Absolutely. And what the one thing that I find like young people is going to totally relate to this film is the idea of a college choice, and that's always because that's a pressure with any parent. With it, what's I'm gonna go ahead and assume you had probably had that struggle with your parents. So did I. Was Harvard ever on the list, or was that made up for for the film?
Harvard was not on the list, but my father had gone to one of the little Ivies, so to speak. And again, growing up in the DC area, which is one of the most educated parts of the entire country, and especially going to a high school like the one that I did, where everybody's kind of on this accelerated path to greatness. You know, there's this incredible pressure to just constantly perform at the highest level, and to go to the name places and the places where you're going to make the best connections. And it's this very, I guess, looking back on it, especially, it feels less about this is what I want because I like it, or because I'm good at it, or because I want it. And it becomes more about this game, you know, like, oh, this person is going to help me get here. And it feels a little psychotic to me, because you start losing your humanity and start looking at people as like opportunities, or just kind of these chess pieces. And I struggled with that. You know, my dad, like any parent, I think, wanted only the best for me, and still does. And I'm now a parent of teenagers, and I certainly only want the best for my kids, and I try and be there for them. But I also think my dad struggled, and my mother did too, with how to kind of be the parent to who I was as a child, you know, and it just didn't work a lot of the time. And his instincts would be to control or take over, because as a child I was clearly screwing it up, you know. And again, I can understand that perspective now, you know, as an adult and as a parent. But I, you know, as a parent, I try and do things like a little bit differently, and try and, you know, you learn from these experiences. And so everything in the feature film for Acid Test has a true moment that came from my life, and that college angst of where to apply when you have, you know, family members really wanting you to go in a certain direction. And especially when you have, I think a lot of people relate to the fact, if you have a creative spirit where you want to go in a creative direction, but there's so much risk involved with those professions, and they don't necessarily make money. And the parent is going, how is my child going to survive on their own if they only want to paint and be artists, and they're never going to make any money, and they're going to be living with me for the rest of their lives, you know? And so I think, you know, trying to deal with that pressure, I ended up going to a very good college, Oberlin, which is in Ohio, but it's a very kind of left-leaning, politically active, just very diverse school that has a conservatory. I took music there, but I was an English major. And so, you know, it fit everything that I needed for me and was also still a very good school. But interestingly, when I was applying to film school for graduate school, I was looking at graduate school differently because I was like, well, now this is for my career and my profession. And I know that networking is a big part of that. And you kind of need to be in the place where you're going to be able to get a job. And I remember my dad saying, well, where are you applying? And I told him the various schools. And he said, well, what's the #1 film school? And I said, well, USC. He said, okay, are you applying there? And I said, no, I don't think I'll get in. And he was like, you should apply. He was like, what, you know, like, just apply. And I was like, okay. I mean, it's a long shot, but, and it ended up being the only school I got into was USC. And so, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, I hope that people see that in the film is this kind of nuanced complexity of family dynamics and that everybody kind of has these different perspectives. So
great. Now let me switch it up. Let's talk about your production. You know, trying to recreate the '90s. I do have to hand it one of the more difficult things to find props from the '90s. You know, cassette tapes and phones and all this kind of stuff. How hard was that hunt? And I'm not blaming you with with certain things. I know like there was a kitchen scene that you had in the film, but all the appliances and the granite countertops those weren't '90s, those were today.
It's not a granite countertop, it's linoleum.
Yeah. Because I know it's just kind of funny. I was going, gosh, I remember my '90s was the countertops would look like those bathroom tiles, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the countertop is just white linoleum. It's not granite. But I mean, there were a couple of, like, I think the toaster or something looks more modern. But actually, all of those appliances that are in the film are from the '90s. But yeah, it is tough to do a period piece. I tend to hold on to a lot of stuff. I think my husband would say I have hoarder tendencies. So I have boxes and boxes of stuff that I've kind of carried with me. So a lot of things we were able to pull from my own resources. The boombox that's in it, I just brought from my house, from my parents' house, because they also have similar hoarder tendencies. The phone, I think, came from my producer. Because my parents actually still use those phones. Like, those are the phones in my parents' house. And so I couldn't take theirs because they would need to go get a new phone and they wouldn't know how to use it. But so, and I think the '90s in a lot of ways is an easier lift than, say, something like the 1950s or the 1920s or the 1800s. You know, it is, yes, far, it is in the past, but a lot of it is less about acquiring the props that will read as '90s, and it's more about taking away the things that read as modern. So making sure cell phones were out of frame. That was a big challenge for the concert scenes because we shot the concert as a live concert. We held a live concert with the bands that we had pre-licensed music from, and we shot it 3-camera documentary style. And we had told people that it was for a movie. You know, they signed release forms and all that. We told them to, you know, luckily fashion is not that different. '90s is actually really coming back. So that wasn't really a concern, but we asked them, please do not film the concert on your phones, which is pretty much how most people go to concert these days, is they record it on their phone. And I'm like, just enjoy the music. But so for the most part, it was fine. But there were a couple of shots where somebody had their phone up, you know, and it was kind of like we either had to crop it out or, you know, something. So that was kind of the hardest part. And we avoided outside stuff, you know, things where we would see cars and things that would read as modern. And then everything else was pretty easy. The television set was a television set I still had in my garage. The television set in Drea's apartment was one that my production designer had, again, in his garage. You know, people hold on to stuff. So if it's kind of within someone's lifetime, somebody has a mother or a grandmother or a garage somewhere, or there's a thrift store where you can find something that's from the 90s. It's not too hard to do that. And so, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I enjoy it.
Now, how was editing your acid scenes? That must have been I want to say a trip.
It was a trip. It was definitely probably the most challenging editing parts of the entire project. As we were shooting it, I like working with editors, and especially on my more professional projects, I usually bring in an editor, and I like having that kind of other person to soundboard off of. But when we were shooting it, I didn't already have somebody lined up, and my cinematographer, Carrie Ann Parker, and I were just, I don't know, we just were gelling so well. And I knew that she edited, and I also edit when I can't afford an editor. And again, because it's such a personal story, I wanted to kind of take a crack at it and really explore the edit. But I knew, especially for the tripping scenes, that I didn't have the kind of technical capability or the experience to edit this kind of hyperkinetic scene. And Kay did. She does a bunch of projects, especially for a local theater here in Houston called Catastrophic, which have these kind of trippy, kind of dynamic edits where people are kind of jerking around. And I thought that would work well if we kind of edited it together. Mm-hmm. And, you know, things kind of, one thing led to another, and basically I edited the entire project myself for the narrative content, for how the story was going to go and how I wanted it to flow. And then for the tripping scenes, I would have Kay do a pass where she would kind of chop it up and experiment, and then she would hand it back to me, and I would now have the kind of blueprint or groundwork of or a model of how those edits worked. And I could take the things that Kay put together well and either add other pieces in that kind of same style, or I could kind of rearrange what she did to fit more of what I needed narratively. And so those sections became a really interesting collaboration where she would do a pass and then I would do a pass, and then she might tweak something and then I would come back and do a final polish on it. And so that really helped get to the edit of what we thought could work, and then also create a good base for what we wanted to do with the visual effects on top of it. Because when you're editing, you don't know, you're just editing the straight picture, and you don't want to spend time or money doing a lot of visual effects work because it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money. And so if you're just kind of figuring out how it's going to work, you kind of want to use some of the just very basic, very quick temp or proxy visual effects to give yourself the feeling of what you are going for, knowing that you're basically going to erase all of that, leave the edit of the original picture, and then hand it off to your visual effects artist, who's going to then build the graphics on top of that. And so, you just don't want to spend time doing a lot of visual effects work and then end up deleting the scene or deleting half of it. It's just a waste of money and time. So,
right. Now, I know you mentioned Juliana before. I've only seen her in one other film before, so she's fairly new to the business. Tell us why she was perfect for the role and how you discovered her.
Juliana has been in a lot of Lifetime movies, and she's been in some episodes of television. So she's a new up and coming actress. She's originally from Houston, but based in Los Angeles. And she had just moved to Los Angeles when we were looking for Jenny, the lead character in the short film. And I was worried about casting Jenny because with young teenage roles, sometimes it takes you a while to find a young actress who has the kind of experience and the training to really carry a role like that. And especially in the feature film, she's in every single scene. There's not a shot or a scene where she doesn't exist. And that's a lot. It's just a ton of work. And I, had been worried about it, but then I guess her manager had heard about our casting call. And like I said, I tend to cast pretty open, and especially because I was worried about casting for Jenny, I put out a national casting call. So New York, LA, and her manager, knowing that Juliana is from Houston, her parents still live here, saw it, and, told Juliana she should audition for it. And so she sent in a tape. And I just find her captivating to watch. I love watching her. I like watching what she does. I like watching how she expresses herself. It's one of those things where she's just captivating. And so it became a very easy answer, because I was like, this is her and we're gonna make it work, and she was really wonderful to work with. She's very busy, which is trying to get her she's just constantly working. She's got an incredible work ethic and is really committed to both her craft and the projects that she works on. And she, as a trained actress, has her own kind of process, but she was really a great collaborator, where we would talk about kind of what's going on, or she would be confused about things, and kind of want to get her own, again, the idea of like, how can she own this moment from her own kind of perspective, and tapping into whatever life experience that she has had. And so, we had a lot of really great conversations to get to that point. And in between the short film and the feature film, we had actually workshopped the feature film draft with Juliana and some of the other actors in a table read and in a weekend workshop. And so she really is a great collaborator.
Wow, that is awesome. And one more thing. This is your first feature film. How was that overall experience? Because now you have a taste of it. You can never go back.
Well, yeah, like I said, doing a feature film is something that every filmmaker always wants to do. It's that I need to achieve this. I need to achieve that. And yes, there's definitely that part of you that's, now that we did that, we need to do it again, and keep doing it and keep pushing yourself creatively and challenging yourself. I think artists are creatively restless generally, and just constantly trying to challenge themselves and do something that they've never done before. And but at the same time, every film is different and it's its own beast. And I was actually quite surprised because I had done a number of short films and I had worked on a couple of features. And I was honestly very surprised going into my own feature how difficult it was to contain the vastness of the story and all the variables that we needed to control in order to keep continuity and figure out what we wanted visually. And so we had to really plan it in pre-production to make sure that we basically had these kind of cheat sheets where it would be like, if you know, it's 3 a.m, it's an overnight shoot, and somebody says, what lens are we on? You have a roadmap that says, this is what lens we're on. This is, you know, our contrast. This is what our color temperature is, you know, because in the moment at 3 a.m, you can't conceive of that. Your brain is just not working in the right way. And you need to kind of conserve energy for making some of the other snap judgments, like, we're running out of time. How do we consolidate all these shots you planned into something else? And so those are the types of decisions that you want to reserve your energy for. You don't want to be trying to figure out how you're going to shoot it in the first place. That's all pre-production. And so I do have a second feature that I wrote that placed in the Nicholl Fellowship, which is a pretty big screenwriting competition. And so I'd love to make that my second feature. At the same time, I've been really inspired by, and they happen to also be Texas filmmakers, but Kat Candler, who was a showrunner for Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar, and is working directing on television episodes now, and David Lowery, who did Pete's Dragon and A Ghost Story, and a bunch of other great movies. I think he's taking on a big project now, but they have continued to make short films even after they features. And there's something I find really creatively inspiring about that, because feature films are great, but they take a long time, they take a lot of money, and not every story has to be a feature film. And if you're just, I think short films are a great way to kind of experiment with like a particular thing. So I'm also developing a story that's actually based on a scene we cut out from Acid Test about kind of a taxi ride that goes wrong and kind of this tension build. And I've never done horror. And so this idea of kind of how do I do something that's kind of in the thriller horror vein and challenge myself that way, but just keep it as a short film, as this kind of tension build. So for me, it's, yes, I definitely want to do another feature, but it's really just about the creative journey and doing something interesting and challenging myself. And I'm also a teacher. I teach film at Houston Community College. And so I often feel like, what's the model that I can be for the students? Because it's not always about these kind of pinnacle things. If you're constantly chasing the top of the mountain all the time, you're just going to exhaust yourself, I think. So, yeah.
Wow, great. Well, let me wrap it up. Acid Test is, as I said, is being showcased at Austin Film Festival. For future audiences, are we going to have more chances in future film festivals to watch Acid Test, or are you looking for distribution?
Both. We are going to, we're already secured with the Houston Cinema Arts Festival down in Houston, which is screening in mid-November. But we are talking to sales agents right now and looking for distribution. I know there's an audience for this film. I have a lot of people contacting me on social media. You can follow us on Acid Test Film, and they're constantly like, where can I see this film? I even had somebody saying, is this coming to New Zealand? And I was like, I hope so. I'd love to get to New Zealand. So, we're applying to festivals. Again, COVID has changed the game in many ways. It's definitely made some things a little bit trickier, but at the same time, I think it's really highlighted streaming content and the fact that people are just eager to watch something. And we have something that I think people will want to watch. And I'm really excited to see what people think. The response so far, we had a packed audience yesterday at Austin Film Festival, and the response was incredible. So, I feel like I feel good about it. I feel really good about everything. And I want to get it out to as many people as possible. So that's the plan. And, if you follow us on Acid Test Film or acidtestproductions.com or acidtestfilm.com, you'll see us. You can follow us along.
Most excellent. Well, I have taken enough of your time. Thank you, Jenny, for sharing this deep conversation about Acid Test. And I can't wait to talk to you again on your next feature film.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Hey, thank you. Next time. Thank you.
Take care.